There are videos I plan to make which I've literally left in the corner of the workshop for quite some time. This is one such example. The idea was to make a picture frame out of concrete, and this was the mould for it. I'm going to put a bit of this chopping board oil in just to try and reduce the likelihood that it will stick. You can also use Vaseline as a release agent, or make the mould out of melamine back sheet material, or even line the inside with parcel tape. These were all good suggestions which I ignored from my followers on Instagram. The nice thing about using a mould made out of real wood is that you get the texture of the grain on the final mould. You may have noticed this effect on some old Brutalist buildings which have used wooden shuttering to contain the pores. It's very Scandinavian and very attractive. I'm going to use a pre-mixed patching cement for this attempt. This mix will have a high amount of Portland cement which will make the concrete set very hard and also very quickly. The mix is 3 powder to 1 water, and you always pour the water into the dry mix, not the other way around. This helps to prevent lumps in the mix. Let's have a trowel somewhere, I don't know where it is. I'm wearing gloves because cement is notorious for fucking up your hands. Keep them nice and soft for YouTube. And if you want, you can also wear a dust mask as well. In fact, I'm going to put a dust mask on now because I can see. The other thing to remember is cement will not set if it is being agitated, unlike plaster which sets when agitated. So keep mixing until you start pouring. I did my mould in several pours and also used nylon fishing wire as a reinforcement, but I didn't get the mould out in time, and as it set, the concrete contracted and broke in all 4 corners. So I did what any sensible person would do and stuck it back together with wood glue. Surprisingly, that worked quite well, but I got too many air bubbles under the lip of the frame. So I'm going to use this one to test a polyurethane varnish finish on the cement and remake the mould with a different mix. This is a polyurethane water-based varnish. I'm going to use this to varnish the concrete. Get an idea of how that will look. There's all sorts of sealers for concrete. You can even just mix PVA, waterproof PVA, and water together. For the second attempt, I picked a different brand of pre-mixed concrete, mainly because it was on offer, but also it had a medium range setting time. It is a flexible floor leveler, which means it contains some kind of plasticizer to prevent micro fractures. But also it must get mixed into a runny consistency to act like a leveler. So the mix should get into all the corners. The only one between the two that I could find is either an hour or 24 hours set time. Obviously an hour was too quick, and I think what happened before was the cooling process meant that it contracted very quickly and formed the cracks. Obviously I don't want to leave it for like a sort of typical brick mortar for like 2 or 3 days to set. And anyway, that stuff is generally quite powdery, so hopefully this is a good in-between mixture. 100 millimeters of water per 5 kilograms. So I'm going to probably do about 4 kilos, so I need about 800 milliliters. I used corner brackets this time along with the nylon thread to reinforce the concrete. I also drilled a few holes on the top of the mould so any air under the lip could be released, but the mix was a lot more runnier, so I may not have had to do this. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I broke this one as well. So let's move along to the third attempt. I think I've made a piece of artwork, and I'm not saying that sarcastically. I think I have. Okay, I'm going to have one last go at this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up the mould and reassemble the outside as I had it before, something like that. But I'm going to change this a little bit. I'm going to cut away maybe in the center, just so I can dismantle this a little more easily. I scraped and hoovered, oiled and reassembled my mould. This time I will use hot glue to hold the central pieces in position. I'll be able to pull these apart without having to unscrew anything. I'm going to take the mould apart before the concrete fully sets as well. Should have cut these at a slight angle to make it easier to pull this out, but it's pretty straight, so I shouldn't have a problem. If I had done it the opposite way around, obviously I wouldn't be able to pull it out. Okay, I'm going to wait about 10 to 20 minutes while this starts to thicken up. I'm going to pop the bits of metal in just to reinforce it, and the corner brackets as well. This time I'm going to make sure these go a lot closer to the inside edge than the outside, because if a little bit chips out here, you're not going to see that on the inside. These are starting to feel quite hard, so I decided to try and open up the mould, at least the central bit. I'll leave the outside as it is. I think I might leave this bit exposed. I think it might be quite nice to be able to see into the frame while it's up. Okay, it looks pretty good. There's a ever so slight hairline fracture there, but it's kind of held, and that hasn't gone through to the other side. There was a few places where the cement had broken off, and that was more to do with how I was dismantling the mould. You can see a little bit there. There's another section there, but I was able to glue them back. This particular mix is a lot more powdery than the first one I did, which is down here. You can also see a slight difference with the colour, despite the fact that I varnished this one. This is also a lot more grayer. The other two, which had a slower set mix, which basically means there was less Portland cement in there, they look a bit more sandy. They've got a kind of greeny yellow kind of colour to them, which is basically either the builder's sand or the sharp sand that was part of that mix. I think if I do this again in future, I'm gonna make my own mix What I will do is use sharp sand, maybe 2 sharp sand for 1 Portland cement, or maybe even 1 sharp sand, 1 Portland cement, and I think that would produce a better colour as well. Now I could, if I had some Portland cement, I could just mix a bit of that up with water and maybe brush that in and see if that kind of binds and kind of do some of the imperfections, but I don't, and I'm not planning to go down to the DIY shop for a little while. So I think what I'm going to do, like the first one, I'm just going to paint it with polyurethane varnish. I think it needs a few coats, and what I need to do is just sand it back by hand after it's dried, just because the brushing process has lifted a bit of grit, that's a bit of dust off the surface of the concrete, and obviously mix that with the varnish. I think the finish could look a little bit nicer. Still not too happy with the colour of it. It looks too wet, too green. You know, I much prefer the kind of colder look of the mix with more Portland cement. Once you put, in this case, the plastic in, you can see the depth of the frame is a little too large, but there's plenty of room to place a piece of work, drawing or something, and a backing board. And obviously you couldn't tack it in as you would normally do with a frame. You would have to probably use silicone sealant or some kind of glue. There's other things I need to think about in terms of hanging and finalizing the mold so the ratio looks a bit better in terms of depth of the lip to the actual depth of the frame. But as a test of the principle of whether it's possible to make a rectangular frame with a rebate out of concrete, it seems it's possible.